The cabin stood alone in the Oregon forest as if it had been placed there by mistake. No neighboring lights, no road noise, just trees, tall, endless, pressing inward from every direction like silent witnesses. Daniel had chosen the place because it promised isolation. A weekend off-grid, no signal, no distractions, just him, Laura, and the quiet. The listing had described it as peaceful, private, immersed in nature. What it hadn't mentioned was how quickly peace can turn into exposure. They arrived just before sunset, tires crunching over gravel that hadn't been disturbed in days. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, the kind of clean scent that makes you believe nothing bad could survive there. Daniel unlocked the door and stepped inside first, performing the small, unconscious ritual of checking corners, windows, locks. Everything looked normal, dusty, but untouched. Laura laughed at his caution. She said the only thing out here was deer, maybe a raccoon, maybe a fox. She had grown up in the city. The forest to her was aesthetic, harmless, something you photograph at golden hour. They unpacked slowly, while the sun dropped behind the trees, shadows stretching long across the clearing until the cabin felt smaller than it had 30 minutes earlier. When darkness arrived, it did so completely. There were no distant town lights bleeding into the sky. The stars were sharp, too sharp. Daniel stepped outside with a beer in hand and felt it immediately. That sense of being observed. Not from a specific direction, just from somewhere within the tree line. He listened. Wind moved high above, brushing the canopy, but at ground level there was nothing. No rustle, no shifting brush. Just stillness. He told himself it was imagination, human instinct misfiring in unfamiliar territory. He went back inside and locked the door anyway. Later, as they lay in bed, the first sound came. Slow, heavy, not scratching, not tapping. A step. Then another. Circling the cabin at a measured pace. The floorboards vibrated almost imperceptibly with each impact, as if something with real weight was testing the perimeter. Laura froze beside him, her breathing shallow. Daniel held still, counting seconds between each footfall. Whatever was outside wasn't rushing. It wasn't startled. It moved with the confidence of something that knew the structure was thin. The steps stopped near the back wall. Silence returned, thick and deliberate. Then came a low exhale, not wind, not an animal call, but the sound of air forced through lungs built for size. Close enough to the wood that Daniel could hear the moisture in it. Laura whispered that it was probably just a deer brushing against the siding. Deer don't breathe like that. Daniel knew it. He didn't say it. He waited. The presence lingered for several long minutes before the weight shifted again and moved away, disappearing into the trees without hurry. No crash, no panic, just departure. Daniel did not sleep after that. He lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling, replaying the rhythm of those steps. When daylight finally filtered through the curtains, it felt artificial, almost staged. Outside, the clearing looked peaceful again, but near the back wall, pressed deep into the soft earth beneath the window, were tracks, large, round, the claws visible, not wandering tracks, not passing through. The prints formed a slow arc around the cabin, close to the foundation, close enough that whatever made them had been inches from where they had been lying. Daniel crouched down and placed his hand beside one of them. His palm didn't fill half the space. Laura stood behind him, silent now. Neither of them laughed this time. The forest in daylight looked the same as it had the evening before. But something had changed. The cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt like something being evaluated. By noon, the forest looked harmless again, almost embarrassed by what it had suggested during the night. Sunlight filtered cleanly through the pine branches, illuminating the clearing in soft gold. And for a few fragile hours, Daniel allowed himself to believe the tracks were just that, tracks. Evidence of proximity, not intention. Bears roam, bears investigate, bears leave. That was the logic he repeated while measuring the distance between each print along the back wall. The spacing wasn't random. The animal had not wandered close by accident. It had followed the structure's perimeter slowly, deliberately, nose near the siding, pausing at each window. He could see where the soil was pressed deeper beneath the bedroom wall. It had stood there, listening. Laura tried to lighten the mood, suggesting they drive into town for supplies, maybe ask a ranger about recent sightings. Daniel agreed too quickly. The gravel road felt longer during daylight than it had the evening before, trees closing tighter along both sides as if the forest resented intrusion. They reached a small general store 12 miles out, little more than a wooden building with a single pump and faded signage. Inside, an older man behind the counter studied them longer than necessary. When Daniel casually mentioned the tracks, the man didn't smile. He asked where the cabin was located. When Daniel described the clearing near the western ridge, the man nodded once, slow. "That's a corridor," he said. "Always has been." He didn't elaborate immediately. He didn't need to. Daniel asked about recent activity. The answer came without hesitation. Large male, scar across the snout. Seen twice this week. Not feeding, moving, watching. The man's tone shifted when he said that last word. Watching. "He's not scared of structures," he added. "And he doesn't bluff charge. If he comes close, it's because he's decided something." Laura asked if they should leave. The man shrugged. "Depends if you want to test patience." That word lingered with Daniel all the way back to the cabin. Patience implied strategy. Back at the clearing, everything looked unchanged, quiet, sunlit, deceptively calm. Daniel unloaded extra supplies, heavier flashlight batteries, a can of bear spray, a box of flares he hadn't planned on buying. He told himself it was precaution, nothing more. But as the afternoon faded and shadows lengthened again, he noticed something new. The garbage bin they had left secured beside the porch was tipped over, not torn apart, not ravaged, just opened and examined. The lid lay several feet away. The contents were scattered with careful efficiency, not chaotic destruction. The cooler from the previous night bore fresh claw marks along its plastic edge. Deep, intentional. This wasn't hunger. It was assessment. Laura stepped back toward the cabin instinctively, her earlier confidence gone. Daniel scanned the tree line and felt it again. That weight in the air, that sense of being calculated. He walked the perimeter slowly, heart rate elevated but controlled, eyes moving across the dense trunks beyond the clearing. That's when he saw it. Not the full body, just movement between shadows. A shape too broad to be deer, too grounded to be elk. It paused behind a cluster of trees roughly 40 yards out. The wind shifted slightly, carrying their scent outward. The shape did not retreat. It adjusted. One step to the side. Then stillness. Daniel's breath shortened. He knew better than to approach, knew better than to shout. So he did what instinct told him. He made noise. Loud, deliberate noise. He grabbed a metal shovel leaning against the cabin and struck it hard against the porch railing, the sharp clang echoing unnaturally through the clearing. The shape did not bolt. It remained, watching. After several long seconds, it turned slowly and disappeared deeper into the forest, without urgency. Laura whispered that maybe it was just passing through. Daniel didn't answer. Passing through animals don't circle cabins at night and return in daylight to evaluate changes. As dusk approached, tension thickened. They secured every window, reinforced the door with a heavy chair beneath the handle. Daniel loaded a rifle he had brought but hoped not to use, placing it within reach rather than hidden in the closet where it had been the first night. The forest shifted with the light. Sounds returned briefly, distant birds settling, branches adjusting under cooling air, then quieted again as darkness sealed the clearing. The first impact came just after full nightfall. Not at a window, not at the door, beneath them. A heavy thud against the cabin's foundation that vibrated through the floorboards and into their bones. Laura gasped. Daniel stood immediately, rifle in hand, listening. Another thud followed, slower, testing the structural integrity rather than attempting entry. Then came the scrape, long claws dragging along the outer wall, slow enough that each individual contact point could be heard through the wood. The sound traveled from the back corner toward the front, unhurried, mapping the structure. Laura covered her mouth to suppress sound. Daniel stepped toward the window, but stopped himself from pulling back the curtain. He knew that eye contact would change the situation. Outside, the movement paused directly beside the front door. Silence. A deep inhale followed, unmistakable and close, the exhale fogging the lower seam beneath the door as warm breath met cooler night air. The door handle shifted slightly, not enough to open, enough to test resistance. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle. The scrape resumed, moving upward this time, claws finding the siding, digging in. The wood creaked under weight as something massive rose onto hind legs and pressed against the cabin wall, high enough that Laura heard the faint pop of stressed nails in the frame. The entire structure groaned, not collapsing, just reminding them how thin it truly was. The weight dropped back down with a heavy thud that shook dust from the ceiling beams, then quiet again. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Laura whispered that maybe it was leaving. Daniel didn't believe that. Predators that leave do so with retreat noise. This was repositioning. The next sound came from the rear window. A sudden, explosive crack as something struck the glass hard enough to spiderweb it instantly without fully shattering it. Laura screamed this time. Daniel fired a warning shot through the wall above the window frame, the blast deafening inside the small cabin. Outside, silence swallowed the echo almost immediately. For a moment, nothing moved. Then from just beyond the tree line came a low, resonant growl. Not loud, not theatrical, deep, controlled, close. It wasn't a bluff. It was communication. The cabin, once peaceful, now felt like a container in contested territory, and the forest did not sound like it was sleeping anymore. The growl did not fade into distance. It stayed low and steady beyond the tree line, vibrating through the clearing like a warning carried in bone rather than air. Daniel kept the rifle trained on the cracked rear window, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. But what terrified him most was not the sound. It was the restraint. The bear wasn't charging blindly. It wasn't panicking after the gunshot. It had absorbed the noise, measured it, and chosen not to retreat. Laura's breathing was uneven now, shallow and rapid, each inhale catching as if the air itself had thickened. The cabin felt smaller with every passing second. Then came the second impact, not against the glass this time, but against the door. A full-bodied slam that shook the hinges violently and forced the reinforced chair backward several inches across the wooden floor. The structure groaned in protest. Daniel staggered, but kept his footing. The doorframe cracked along the upper seam. A heavy exhale followed, closer now, followed by the scrape of claws digging into wood. The bear rose again, pressing its weight forward, testing vertical resistance. The cabin shuddered as hundreds of pounds leaned into it. Laura screamed as a long claw punched partially through the weakened paneling near the window, splintering wood inward in a shower of fragments. The animal wasn't trying to squeeze in yet. It was destabilizing. Another slam. Harder. The top hinge snapped with a metallic pop. The door bent inward under pressure, the lower hinge straining visibly. Daniel fired again, this time through the door at chest height. The shot punched through wood and into mass. The response was immediate. Not retreat, fury. A roar exploded through the clearing, deeper and louder than anything before, raw with pain and dominance. The next impact shattered the remaining hinge completely. The door tore inward under the bear's weight, wood splitting as the massive body forced entry halfway into the cabin. For a split second, Daniel saw it clearly in the muzzle flash glow. Thick shoulders, scarred muzzle, small dark eyes locked not on chaos, but on him. The rifle kicked again as he fired point blank into the advancing shape. The bullet struck, but did not stop momentum. The bear lunged fully inside, knocking over the small kitchen table in a violent sweep of its forelimb. Laura stumbled backward toward the bedroom doorway. The cabin was no longer shelter. It was a confined arena. The bear swung again, claws slicing across the wall inches from Daniel's head, carving deep gouges through drywall and into the support beam beneath. Daniel fell backward, scrambling to cycle the bolt, but the animal was already repositioning with terrifying speed for something its size. It wasn't frantic. It moved with controlled aggression, cutting off escape routes. Laura grabbed the flare from the supply pile and struck it blindly, sparks bursting before the flare ignited in a blinding red blaze. She hurled it directly toward the bear's face. The sudden burst of light and heat forced a recoil for half a second. Not fear, but disruption. Daniel used that second. He rolled sideways, regained footing, and dragged Laura toward the narrow hallway leading to the back exit. The bear recovered instantly, swiping the flare aside and charging down the confined space with explosive force. The hallway amplified its size, claws slamming against walls, splintering wood outward. Daniel fired again into the upper chest as it closed distance, the muzzle flash lighting the entire corridor in strobing bursts. The bullet hit. The bear faltered but did not collapse. Blood darkened its fur, but its movement only intensified. They reached the rear utility door just as the animal's weight crashed into Daniel from behind, sending him forward against the frame. Pain shot through his shoulder as claws tore into fabric and skin. Not a killing bite, but a disabling strike. Laura screamed and yanked the door open into the darkness outside. Cold night air flooded in. Daniel shoved her through first, then stumbled after her, as the bear lunged again, jaws snapping inches from his leg. They ran into the clearing without direction, fog and darkness swallowing depth perception instantly. The cabin behind them groaned as the bear burst back through the doorway, its silhouette monstrous against the faint interior light. It did not hesitate. It pursued. Each stride closed distance fast. Daniel could hear it gaining ground, breath heavy, claws tearing into earth. He grabbed the final flare from his pocket, struck it while running, and pivoted at the last second, throwing it directly beneath the charging animal's path. The flare burst against its forelegs, showering sparks and flame upward into its chest. This time, the reaction was violent. Not retreat, rage. The bear reared briefly, roaring in raw fury, then dropped back down. But the hesitation created space. Daniel and Laura dove behind the woodpile near the edge of the clearing, using it as partial cover. The forest seemed to contract around them, every tree suddenly closer. The bear advanced again, slower now, blood visible along its shoulder, breath steaming in thick clouds. It was no longer testing. It had committed. Daniel steadied the rifle with shaking hands, knowing there would not be another opportunity if this failed. The animal charged one final time through the thinning smoke of the flare, jaws open, weight driving forward with unstoppable force. Daniel aimed not at the chest, not at the body, but at the narrow point between eye and ear, as Keller had once described in a hunting article he'd read years earlier. He exhaled. He fired. The shot cracked through the clearing and echoed violently into the forest. The bear stumbled mid-stride, momentum carrying it forward another several feet, before collapsing hard into the dirt just yards away from them. The ground trembled under its fall. For a long, suspended moment, it did not move. Then one hind leg twitched. Once. Twice. Silence returned, slowly, unnaturally complete. Daniel did not lower the rifle. Not yet. The forest watched. And something in that silence suggested this wasn't over, only paused. For a long moment after the bear fell, the forest did not react. No birds lifted, no branches shifted. Even the wind seemed to withdraw, as if the entire clearing had stepped back to observe what would happen next. Daniel kept the rifle raised, sight fixed on the massive body lying only yards away, smoke from the barrel drifting past his face in thin gray ribbons. Laura crouched behind him, hands trembling, eyes locked on the dark shape in the dirt. The bear's chest did not rise. Blood spread slowly beneath it, soaking into soil that had already been marked by its weight for 2 nights. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Daniel moved forward carefully, each step deliberate, circling wide rather than approaching directly. He had heard stories about wounded bears rising at the last second. He had no intention of becoming one. When he finally reached a position where he could see the eye clearly, he understood. It was open but unfocused, reflecting nothing. The bullet had landed exactly where it needed to. The body that had shaken their walls and tested their door lay still now, reduced to muscle and fur and silence. Laura exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours and collapsed onto the ground, adrenaline draining from her limbs all at once. Daniel did not feel relief. Not yet. He felt something closer to shock. The cabin behind them stood damaged and broken, its door torn from hinges, windows fractured, walls gashed open by claws that had nearly reached bone. The place that had been marketed as peaceful isolation now looked like evidence of a siege. Daniel lowered the rifle slowly. His shoulder throbbed where the claws had caught him. Blood soaked through his sleeve, warm and sticky. It was not deep enough to kill him, but it was deep enough to remind him how close it had come. Laura crawled to him, pressing her hands against the wound, whispering that they needed to leave, that they couldn't stay another minute in that clearing. Daniel nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the tree line. Something about the silence felt unfinished. Then he heard it. Not close, not immediate, but there. A distant crack of a branch deeper within the forest. Then another. Not the chaotic scattering of prey, not the aimless wandering of deer. Movement with weight, more than one set of steps. Daniel felt the realization settle slowly. Large males dominate territory alone, but territory does not stay empty for long. The clearing had been a corridor, a crossing point. Removing the dominant animal did not remove the path. Laura followed his gaze and heard it too now. Faint, deliberate shifts within shadow. Not charging, not retreating, observing. The forest was recalibrating. Daniel understood in that instant that staying to celebrate survival would be arrogance. He helped Laura to her feet and moved quickly toward the car parked at the edge of the gravel track. Every step away from the fallen bear felt heavier than the last. The clearing seemed to stretch longer than it had before. The cabin loomed behind them, broken and exposed. They reached the vehicle without further incident, doors slamming shut, louder than intended. Daniel started the engine on the first turn. Headlights cut through the trees in twin white beams, illuminating drifting dust and floating particles in the night air. As they pulled away, Laura looked back once through the rear window. The bear's body lay partially lit by the fading glow of their taillights. And beyond it, just at the border, where light surrendered to shadow, she thought she saw movement. Low shapes weaving between trunks, cautious but present. Daniel did not look back. He kept his eyes fixed on the narrow road ahead, hands tight on the wheel. The forest did not chase them. It did not need to. It simply closed behind them, swallowing the clearing once more into darkness. By the time they reached the main road, the adrenaline had begun to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding. The forest had not attacked randomly. It had responded. The cabin had not been hunted out of hunger. It had been tested, evaluated, and challenged when resistance was shown. Pain escalates instinct. Territory enforces itself. Weeks later, officials would classify the bear as an aggressive anomaly, a rare case of structural intrusion. The cabin would be repaired, listed again, marketed under softer words. But Daniel would never forget the rhythm of those steps circling the walls, nor the way the animal had stood on its hind legs and pressed its weight against their shelter, as if measuring how much it would take to collapse it. The forest does not sleep. It listens. It watches. It waits for sound and scent and weakness. And when humans choose isolation, without understanding the corridors beneath their feet, the correction does not come with warning. It comes with weight.